In the wake of the Pennsylvania report, the Bishop of Fort Worth says prayers from church leaders are meaningless unless they are coupled with concrete action. Bishop Michael Olsen was the first bishop to talk to News Nightly about the abuse scandal following the resignation of Archbishop Theodore McCarrick. Bishop Olsen says in a statement, quote, "Justice also requires that all of those in church leadership who knew of the alleged crimes and sexual misconduct and did nothing be held accountable morally and legally." In the Attorney General's report, the grand jury lists 4 recommendations saying, quote, "Now we want to leave you, we want something to show for it." The list includes eliminating the criminal statute of limitations for sexually abusing children, which is currently up to the age of 50, urging lawmakers to crack down to create a civil window in Pennsylvania so that older victims may now sue for damages when their bodies were defiled as children. And it says clarify failure to report penalties. The penalties must be clarified for church officials. Finally, the grand jury believes civil confidentiality agreements should not cover communications with law enforcement. Joining me now is Edward Condon, the D.C. editor for the Catholic News Agency. Ed, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Are these good recommendations?
They're solid recommendations, and let's face it, the church needs all the recommendations it can get right now. I think some are more strong than others. I think some raise questions, but some are no-brainers. Opening up a civil window for older victims to come forward with their stories and seek redress is a solid move. It's something that people want, and I think there needs to be an avenue for justice for these victims.
What about the statute of limitations?
So the statute of limitations, the idea of lifting that for criminal prosecutions is problematic. And the reason for that is this. Everyone wants to see abuser priests face justice. Everyone wants to see abusers generally face justice. But when you're talking about such a backlog of cases, in this report's instance, going back 70 years, there is a real problem of evidence. And it's important that while you allow victims to come forward and you give them a mechanism for seeking justice, you're not at the same time lowering the evidentiary standard and damaging the criminal justice system.
The FBI victim unit came to the grand jury, and I thought this was fascinating. They said that the terms that the Catholic Church used around this abuse are very typical of abuse situations. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
They did. Well, what happened was the FBI came back and said that having examined documents across all 6 dioceses, they identified what they call a playbook for obscuring the truth. And they identified certain behaviors that were a problem. And they're familiar to anyone who works with the church. In some cases, it was employing euphemisms in internal documents and speaking publicly. Not speaking of rape or child abuse, but talking about boundary violations or inappropriate conduct.
And sick leave was one of my
This is another one
issues
of
with the report.
When clergy are placed on leave or removed from ministry because they are facing accusations, the faithful aren't told what's going on. They aren't told why the priest has been removed, but they're told he's suffering from exhaustion or he's going on a leave of absence for his health. And this is something that's happened over a period of years. And it's very damaging, not only because it damages the trust of the faithful in the church, but it makes them suspicious of priests more generally. Because what about when a priest does need to go on a medical leave of absence? All of a sudden it's raising eyebrows in the pews.
Cardinal Wuerl, as we just saw, celebrated Mass today. He's mentioned, as Jason Calvi reported, more than 200 times in the report. He handled several of these cases. What does this report mean for him?
I think it puts him under a lot of pressure. He's already facing severe questions in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., because it came to light that there were numerous allegations facing his predecessor, Theodore McCarrick, who was still living in the Archdiocese at the time. I think this doesn't help him at all. I think there are a lot of cases that he can point to in his own history as Bishop of Pittsburgh that suggest stronger action than other bishops in Pennsylvania were taking at the time. But I think the real thing now for every bishop, Cardinal Wuerl included, is recognizing that no one was acting strongly enough and that even the best practice of the time is objectively not good enough.
So what is good enough? The Vatican didn't respond today.
Well, it's understandable that the Vatican doesn't want to respond to this. I mean, this is a problem for the Church in America particularly, and I don't imagine the Vatican have read all 900 pages yet, and it would be, I think, premature for them to get involved.
Okay, but wait 1 second. I'm going to stop you there because it's 900 pages. I was up till midnight reading them. You were up reading them. Why are you saying the Vatican can't read them and make a comment?
Well, I'm saying they can read them, but I think it's important that when Rome does respond to this, and I think it will, that it responds to it in the way that Rome needs to, which is to hold bishops to account and say why weren't proper processes followed. And I think that's something that really shines through in this report, is that priests are removed from ministry, but they aren't laicized, they aren't subjected to a legal process, their files aren't sent to Rome, and that's what Rome needs to be looking at, is what was the procedure followed in all these cases and why wasn't it followed?
But by the Vatican not commenting, isn't that playing right into the problem of the Church not being transparent?
I think the Church does need to be transparent, and the Vatican does need to respond. I'm not saying it doesn't need to respond, but I'm saying that I think there's nothing to be served by the Vatican putting out a platitudinous initial statement. I think the Vatican and the Church authorities in this country will be judged by hard actions, not by words.
Thank you so much, Ed Condon, Catholic News Agency. Thank you.